now. Okay, to you, David.
Good morning, everybody, from the Roy Branson Legacy Sabbath School in Loma Linda, California. For those of you who are perhaps looking at this for the first time on Facebook or YouTube, I am one of hundreds of people whose name is David Larson. So I'm also joined by Forrest Butler and by Monty Butler, Forrest Howe and Monty Butler and Bronwyn Larson in helping us bring this about. Matthew 5, beginning with verse 20, in the King James Version. I think the Sermon on the Mount begins with descriptions of what a Christian's life should be. The next topic Jesus handles is how should we relate to the wider world? And there we have the salt and the light. And then Jesus says, your righteousness should exceed that of the scribes and Pharisees. That is, he's pointing to the very best people in their culture and saying, your righteousness should exceed theirs. But then he goes on to give illustrations of in what ways it should exceed theirs. First of all, he talks about the Christian life being somewhat more inward. And he talks about anger, he talks about adultery there. And we can get hung up on all the details, but the point is the Christian life should be somewhat more inward. The other thing, though, is that he develops a theme that the Christian life should be somewhat more radical or extensive and so forth. And here he has the idea of divorce and oath keeping. In each case, he's moving the same direction as the previous text had, but he's pushing them further. And then the third passage chunk of the Sermon on the Mount is an invitation to be more universal. So more inward, more radical, more universal. Why bring this up? Because I believe that verse 48 has been mischievous in our culture. It says, be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. And many discussions have occurred about that, and not all of them have been pleasant. I think there's a problem here in that we put a conceptual space between verse 47 and verse 48, as though verse 48 were introducing a new topic. I think verse 48 is concluding the topic that began at verse 44 or 43. So look at that perfection as connected to being universal in one's affection and not as introducing something else. And therefore, if one does that, the independent suggestion that we be perfect slips away, along with lots of conflict and heartache and broken homes and divided campuses and all that. For I say unto you, that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter the kingdom of heaven. You have heard it said that thou shalt not kill, and whoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment. But I say unto you, that whosoever is angry with his brother without cause shall be in danger of the judgment, and whoever says to his brother, Rakah, shall be in danger of the council. But whoever shall say, thou fool, shall be in danger of hell fire. Therefore, if thou bring thy gift to the altar, and there rememberest that thy brother hath aught against thee, leave there thy gift before the altar, and go thy way. First be reconciled to thy brother, and then come and offer thy gift. Agree with thine adversary quickly, whilst thou art in the way, lest at any time the adversary deliver thee to the judge, and the judge deliver thee to the officer, and the officer deliver thee to the prison. Verily I say unto you, thou shalt by no means come out thence, till thou hast paid the uttermost farthing. Ye have heard that it was said by them of old, You shall not commit adultery. But I say unto you, that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. And if thy right hand offend thee, pluck it out and cast it out from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not the whole body should be cast into hell. And if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off and cast it from thee, for it is profitable for thee that one of your members should be perished, and not that thy whole body should cast into hell. It hath been said, Whoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement. But I say unto you, that whosoever shall put his wife away, save for the cause of fornication, causeth her to commit adultery, and whosoever shall marry her, that is divorced, committeth adultery. Again, ye have heard that it hath been said by them of old, Thou shalt not forswear thyself, but thou shalt perform unto the Lord thine oaths. But I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by earth, for it is his footstool, neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. Neither shalt thou swear by thy head, because thou canst not make one hair white or black. But let your communication be yea, yea, nay, nay, for whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil. You have heard it said by them of old, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you, that ye resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him also the other. And if any man will sue thee at the law, and take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also. And whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain. Give to him that asketh thee, and from him that would borrow of thee, turn not away. You have heard that it was said, Thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you, that ye may be children of your Father in heaven. For he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sendeth rain on the just and the unjust. For if ye love them which love you, what reward have ye? Do not even the publicans do the same? And if you salute your brethren only, what do ye more than others? Do not the publicans so? Then be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. 48 is on the same theme as 47. That is universal love. 48 is not introducing a separate topic of perfection, or so it seems to me. Let us begin with prayer. Dear God, thank you again for Sabbath school. Thank you for this time to get together. Thank you for these ancient texts and what they might mean for us. Thank you for Doug Morgan, who has studied the meaning of these texts for our own time. Help us to be sensitive and teachable and also inquiring. We pray in Christ's name. Amen. Thank you, Doug, for being back.
Thank you. Sorry for the delay, but I found the thing I needed to click there to get the mic on. It's great to be with you. Thank you, Dave.
Are you in New York as well today?
I am at Ephesus Church at the heart of Harlem, and thankful for their good auspices to let me use a little space here to participate.
Wow. Be sure to thank them at the appropriate time and way for their generosity. Do you typically worship there?
Yes.
Okay. Now, today we're going to talk about Adventism and War, and I'd like to do it in a couple of 3 steps. First, I'd like to hear about your own development of thought on this. Then something about the development of Adventist thought upon this. And thirdly, the development of the Adventist Peace Fellowship. And finally, I'd like to explore the issue of exceptions, because the minute one is told that one is a pacifist, the question that comes to one's mind immediately is, what do you do if someone is raping your wife and you are standing there? Are you supposed to be willing to let that happen without any protest? So it's not a very sophisticated question, but it's the first question that comes to mind when people deal with pacifism. And so I would like to put that question up front and early. So here we go. Let's begin with your own childhood. Doug, were you ever a pathfinder?
Yes, I was, I think, probably among the world's worst pathfinders, but I was a pathfinder.
Why do you say among the world's first?
Oh, no, worst.
Oh, the worst. Okay, one of the
Because
world's
I
worst.
can't, I say that because, you know, they're trying to teach us how to tie knots. And I just I couldn't figure it out. I cried.
Oh,
Anyway,
no.
I was a pathfinder.
Oh, that's sad. It's supposed to be an affirming experience, not a.
Yes, and it was overall. That was just for a little human interest touch.
Did you folk march at all?
Well, we marched, yes, sir.
Did that seem overly militaristic to you then?
It did.
It did.
Yeah, because at the upper ranges of, I forget the exact age range, but it would have been about 1968, 1969. And even though I was only an adolescent, I was aware of what was going on in the world, and protests over war and so forth. And so it did seem, I didn't care for it. I didn't do anything about it. I marched along, but
Was this in Lincoln?
this was in Lincoln, yes.
Was it a big club?
Yes, College View Church, yes.
Do you remember when you first started to have doubts about this militarization of your Pathfinder Club?
No, I have a picture in my mind of the gym, and you know, kind of the military drill style orders being called out. And just I have a clear sense of thinking that this doesn't resonate well with me, but I don't have much of a better articulated thought of exactly, you know, my thought processes.
Okay. Were you ever a member of the Medical Cadet Corps?
No, I was just a bit too young, I think. I might just add that when I became of draft age, it was just when the draft was being eliminated. So I was prepared. I honestly can't remember whether I registered or whether I was only getting ready to register. But anyway, the Cadet Corps, I suppose, was still going, but probably, at least in much of the United States, was not, or at least would be about to be, much less active.
Was there a Medical Cadet Corps on the campus of Union College? Do you remember?
Yes. Now, that memory, though, is from my earlier childhood, because we lived in Lincoln for several years before I went to college. And of course, historically, the Union was one of the key origin, two or three key origin points, but it was still there. My brothers, I have two older brothers. I remember them going for the summer few weeks or whatever.
Okay, help us to trace your thinking from there when you began to have some doubts as a pathfinder to a more fully developed and I would say settled conviction that militarization was contrary to the gospel.
Yes, well, I think that it was the social and political environment of protests against the war in Vietnam that is the starting point. And gradually then I began, as I learned about our history as Adventists, it began to come together. And I think to move the response along to your question, because honestly, it's a bit hazy as to the process. But when I was in graduate school, and this was the first year, so it would have been 81, I took a seminar, and I think it was the Ethics of War and Peace from James M. Gustafson at Chicago.
Wow.
And it so happened that we well, I think that we had we could choose someone each week. Someone would make a presentation on a book, and so one of them on the list was this book, intriguing book called The Politics of Jesus by John Howard Yoder. And it worked out that I gave the presentation on that. Now, of course, Gustafson was totally opposed in some ways to Yoder's position, but yet, well, I hope this is not too much of a digression, but for me personally, that year was a struggle because I didn't feel like I was going to make it there academically. But Gustafson gave me a good grade, and that for what I did, and that was a confirming experience. But more important, that is when I can trace a sense of conviction about Christian pacifism, messianic pacifism, if you will, and yeah. Maybe
so
I'll
reading The Politics of Jesus by John Howard Yoder was a transformative experience.
Yes.
For you.
Yes.
Pivotal time. Now, parenthesis, good on you for being able to study with Gustafson. That's wonderful. Yeah. One of the great privileges of your life. Now,
indeed.
Moving on from there, eventually you did research on this topic in Adventism or something like that. How did your research move you along?
Well, for my dissertation, which became the book Adventism in the American Republic, war was certainly an important aspect of that. So that sort of laid the ground floor. Subsequently, I've written a number of articles, Journal of Adventist Education, Andrews University Seminary Studies, some in the Review. And just recently, David Trim and I believe the dean of the seminary are they're co-editing a book on Adventism and War, something like that. And so I was asked to do a chapter on that. And my only reason for mentioning that I've done some of these things really is that every time I do it, my understanding changes somewhat. And so anyway, yeah.
there's a question about the name of the book that you found so transformative. The author is John Howard Yoder, Yoder, and the title is very provocative, The Politics of Jesus. And I think many people found that to be a transformative book, and I would include myself amongst them. Now, did your research take you into the origins of Adventist thinking on this matter?
Only to the extent of the Millerite origins and the Millerite Adventists who were involved with the, Joshua V. Himes be the prime example, but there would be many, many others who were involved in all kinds of social causes and movements. And one of them was the American Peace Society. And there is a strand of influence then into Seventh-day Adventism, I would say, from that. And so that, I think that's about as far as I could say I went in terms of, where did the views come from?
What was the name of that group?
I'm pretty sure it was the American Peace Society. There were two peace organizations in the antebellum period, and one of them was came out spun off, you might say, from William Lloyd Garrison and the American Anti-Slavery Society, and that was the one that Himes was actually rather prominent as an organizer in that one. I'd have to double check the exact name, but American Peace Society, I think it was.
Well, in your own reflection, you have come to some narrative about how Adventists over the generations have dealt with this issue. What does your narrative look like?
I think that maybe the best way to get at that is to make a point that I kind of have a burden on, and I still can't seem to get much of a, I need somebody to show me some counter evidence or really even engage my point. But here it is. In the Adventism that those of us who grew up Adventists, came up in, and still to this day, if you look at material put out by the Adventist Chaplaincy Ministries and so forth, there is the idea that there was something called non-combatancy, which was not full pacifism, but the term that became popular in the mid-20th century was conscientious cooperation. So we will serve in the military, but we want a non-combatant role. At least that was the recommended position. And that we were different. We were not like the Quakers. We weren't full-blown pacifists all the way along. But I'm convinced that this distinction between Adventists and what became known as the peace churches was a product of the 1920s and 1930s, that from our beginnings in the American Civil War, we were explicitly and avowedly the same as Quakers, and sought government recognition of that. And I think that then, now, let me just give one little caveat, if you will. I do recognize, and one cannot avoid recognizing, that there was quite a diversity of thought among Advent, and some recent research by Kevin Burton showing us that there was considerable participation in the military, regardless of what positions the leaders were stating in the Seventh-day Adventist, embryonic Seventh-day Adventist community. But that as far as the public positions taken, that it was called non-combatant, but so were the Quakers. In other words, we were just as much conscientious objectors, pacifists, non-combatants, if you will, as the Quakers. The Mennonites don't seem to be mentioned too much because I think their profile in American society was still not as strong as it would later become. But I think we're very uncomfortable. Most are very uncomfortable to saying that Adventists began as pacifists because of that word, and I'm sure we'll get into some aspects of it, is problematic in many ways. But anyway, that's kind of a distinctive point that I'm not saying I'm the only one who agrees with it, but I've sort of been trying to hammer away on that point.
Well, let me press that a little bit. One way to deal with this would be to say that Adventism has been pluralistic on this issue all the way through, from the beginning to the end. Or another way would be to say the positions we took in the 60s and 70s about being conscientious cooperators, not objectors, but cooperators, that was our position, the one position or the predominant position all the way along. But I hear you suggesting that, well, we had a position and then it changed. And
Yes.
our position today is not what it was, and there may be some value in going back to that earlier tradition. What happened? What causes the change?
I think World War I would be really a critical turning point. Let me just say that I think going into World War I, I would say that despite the diversity of viewpoints and diversity of weight on which that Adventist leaders, writers, editors, ministers put on this subject, there was a general agreement that we were not willing to participate in military combat, and essentially that's pacifism. Now, I think that there was a difference between what I would call prophetic pacifism and quietistic pacifism, and the prophetic pacifism is going to be more critical of the government, more critical of claiming Christian that as a Christian nation for a Christian cause that you're fighting. And so during the Spanish-American War, we had in our publications, A.T. Jones, but many others as well, who were very, very outspoken, criticizing U.S. militaristic and imperialistic policies. And the prophetic pacifism is kind of like, you want to take a stand for the right. That's the most important thing, regardless of the consequences. So that almost this, not cultivating martyrdom in a sort of a sick way, but just to sort of emphasize the importance of this strong, confrontational witness, so to speak. Whereas quietist pacifism was more saying, placed more emphasis, I would say. And now, of course, as always with the kind of distinctions, it's a sliding scale, but just hopefully for clarification, that we put the quietist pacifism would put a lot more emphasis on those passages like we in the New Testament where it says, pray for the rulers so that we may live quiet and peaceable lives, that we don't want to be disruptive, be much less inclined to speak out against the government, and would like to avoid confrontation as much as possible, while at the same time wanting to avoid a sort of a militaristic, jingoistic spirit. But more concerned about mission. In other words, we don't want to take this narrow position that's going to put us at odds if we can help it. Now, going into World War I think that there was a transition. I mean, this is a very, very broad generalization, and we can get into the details, but sticking with the United States for a moment, there was a transition to the more quietistic sort of pacifism, which lent itself to be a much more cooperative or supportive of placing much higher priority on being with the government. So that in 1917, the first pronouncement that came out from the church leaders for North America, or for the United States, was that we have always been pacifists. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I take the word back. We have been non-combatants, and that, since the Civil War, we were recognized as such, and we will accept whatever alternatives that the government provides that we can conscientiously do so. But then when the war effort got into full scale, the military draft was developed, and the machinery and the promotion of it, then the statement that comes out in 1918 is that it starts by saying we regard loyalty to government as a part of our faith just as much as the need to obey the commandments. Something, I'm not wording that real well, but the point is that the priority of the statement is flipped, that we want to support the government. We'll do anything we can to support the government, except that we encourage, we would like not to bear arms, and we would like not to have to do a duty that is unnecessary, routine, could be done another time or done by some, it's not a urgent thing or something that saves life and so forth, that we'd have the recognition of the Sabbath. But it's my point is that it's more like, yes, we're all for you. We're with you 100%. And we'll encourage our people to buy the war bonds, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we humbly ask that you will allow us those two things. And so after the war, there was still quite a bit of debate. But then you have the Medical Cadet Corps coming in, who want to be better prepared, understandably, very wisely in many ways. I would say we want to be better prepared for the next war. But you also have statements coming, or documents coming out, like Our Youth in Time of War by J.P. Neff. And he says, we are not pacifists, we're not anti-war, we're not anti-militarist, we wear our uniform, all of that stuff. He wants to say, we're none of that. Even though, because of our understanding of the commandments, we do not want to bear arms. But that emphasis really then prevailed. And it's not so much, and I'll stop my speech with this. It's not so much a shift in the precise course that you would take, because coming back to the Civil War, the permission that we got, the recognition that we got, entailed an agreement to do hospital duty or aid to the freed slaves. Now, the war didn't last long enough for I don't know that we have hardly any accounts of Adventists actually doing those alternatives because well, there's one or two. But now, alongside that, though, I will say that the hospital duty and helping with the freed slaves would not have been like formally under a military command structure like the later, combatant medical corps in the U.S. Army. But be that as it may, but the point here is that all along, the similarity, the continuity is all along, we were willing to accept an alternative. But it's just that by the time you get to World War II, the mentality and the emphasis is greatly shifted towards cooperation, support, and it's understandable for many reasons. And then that, I think, sets up some things that come later. But I think I better stop now there because I've gone on quite a while.
Well, that's very helpful. Would this be correct, or is this an oversimplification that the change was a change in priorities? If we talk about prophetic pacifism and quietistic pacifism, what happened is that they reversed themselves in priority. They still were both there, but quietistic pacifism surfaced and prophetic pacifism submerged. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. And at the same time, then that is when the distinction was made between, the Mennonites, the Quakers, and the Church of the Brethren. They become somewhat defined now by their willingness only to take a civilian work assignment, a work camp. So still under government auspices, you see, but I think that would have been more parallel to what hospital duty or care of the freedmen would have been in the Civil War. But anyway, I add that in just to sharpen the distinction. That's a road we didn't take. Certainly the prophetic pacifism is gone, and there is still kind of a narrow legal pacifism that's favored in the sense that we're not going to take up arms and kill ourselves. But other than that, you see very much pro the government's. This was an era in which it was a so widespread assumption of the righteousness of American military, action, that in a way it's not surprising.
Just a little bit, what kinds of secular or non-governmental, or was it governmental work the Mennonites were willing to do? For instance, would they work in an arms factory or a factory creating tanks or something like that?
No, and I think that's a very good question. To help clarify, these were more like rural work camps. Now, I would have to go back and review it or do a little more research on what was the actual outcome of whatever it was of the work that they were doing. But it was not direct into armaments. Although, having said that, in a wartime economy, it's almost impossible to be completely free of any transactions that would somehow connect with the war. But it was a rural work camps, I think, much more compatible with kind of the pacifist outlook than armaments production.
They sound almost like the I forgot the name of it, the civil CCC or something. What was it that Franklin Roosevelt developed? Yeah. What was the name of that?
Yes, the Civilian Conservation Corps. that type of. By the way, maybe I should throw into in Canada. Now, I don't know nearly as much as I'd like to, but Barry Bussey has done some good work on this and even helped produce a documentary. Canadian Adventists, much more in the World War II era, went into the work camps as opposed to going into becoming enrolled in the actual armed services.
Okay. Now, you mentioning Canada brings the question to bear. How was Adventism dealing with this issue worldwide?
Well, I guess probably the best way to deal with that is to come back to the World War I era, and L.R. Conradi, Ludwig R. Conradi, was an enormously influential and successful pioneer of Adventism in Germany, Russia, primarily with German-speaking Russians, and beyond. But Germany was a much more well, I feel like I'm falling into a stereotype here to call it militaristic, but the thought that you might opt out of required military service was much more foreign, and it was not yet exactly a liberal democracy, although I think it was going in that direction. Anyway, the point being is that it was much more difficult to seek an alternative or to declare yourself to be non-combatant or whatever. And so it's a complex story, but in brief, when the war broke out, a circular letter was sent out from the Hamburg church, which was the main, the headquarters of the union, maybe even a division, and it bore the signature of Guy Dale, who was the executive secretary, or whatever they called it then, of the division, but Conradi was the head president. Basically, it said we need to go along with whatever, we need to be good citizens, do whatever our government asks. Furthermore, just like in Joshua 6, I believe, where the children of Israel do fight on the Sabbath, if we're commanded to do that, we should do it. And so this caused not only tremendous controversy in Germany and Europe and elsewhere, but in the United States as well, because some would say, well, we really need to, this is terrible, this is apostasy. But others are more sympathetic. But anyway, that is just one example of the diversity of governmental contexts that one has to deal with, and the diversity of positions taken, in those settings.
I have a vague impression that the church in Europe, maybe Eastern Europe, was deeply divided on this issue as time went on, and maybe to some extent suffers from that tensions now. What can you say about that?
Well, definitely. This, I think, World War I then was really the origin point of the Reformed Adventist movement, which became international, but was, particularly strong in Germany And again, in World War II, there would be a division over this, but a substantial group, I don't know, in the thousands still, two different denominations. Now, one of these denominations in 2014, the centennial of the outbreak of the war, there was a conference at Friedenau, is it Friedenau University or whatever, the school there, founded by Conradi. But anyway, at that conference, there was an apology from two of the German unions to the representatives of one of the Reformed churches, and a acceptance of that apology. And so it was kind of quite a little interesting moment there, where there was the recognition that the denomination did not support people who wanted to take a stand on what they thought their Adventist faith taught them to do. And as I think you can imagine, when you get into a situation, and think of World War II, it's probably a clearer example. And some of these Reform Adventists were even given up, that they were turned over because of information given by the quote regular Adventists. On the other hand, there would be stories of how, because of the extremism of the Reform Adventists, then that brought recrimination on all Adventists. So this is a deeply divisive thing.
Did you say that some Adventists would report on other Adventists to the government for their lack of loyalty?
Yes, that was the type of thing that made the two German Union conferences feel that there was an apology needed. That and stories were told to that effect. Now, I can't say that I personally have researched them all, but I'm just saying that this is very serious stuff, because again, remember the regime that you're under. Your life, it might be your life or the other Adventists who's more radical, it could be. So anyway.
I didn't realize there were two denominations that emerged from this disagreement, and both of them were there in 2017.
No, only one. There was called the International Reform, and then the other Reform Adventist group was not represented. So,
oh, I see. Okay, all right.
But it was two of the SDA. I don't know, were North and South German Union conferences, but anyway, yeah.
What can you say about the relationship between the institutional Adventism and the government in Germany in World War I, and then institutional Adventism and the government in Germany in World War II?
I can say some very general things, but I don't have a detailed expertise. But you see, the military service issue was a problem for German Adventists right from the beginning of Conradi's work, when the membership starts to take off. And by the way, it was much more successful in Germany than any other European country for many years. And so Conradi claims that Ellen White told him that you just have to do your best, just follow your conscience. And so if they had tried to go on record as conscientious objectors or non-combatants or whatever, I'm talking about before the war now, that would have inhibited the growth very much, at least as Conradi saw it. And so it was a complex thing where he celebrated stories where Adventists went into the military and they took a stand by faith and God blessed them. But you never want to take an official stand. And he would not, in at least one court case, he said, no, I never told them to do that. Because that would implicate the whole, anyway, so I need to avoid digressing. But the point is that Conradi had carefully crafted a compatibility of Adventism with the German authorities in World War I. And that's something that was at stake. But then one could see a precedent there, I think. But in the World War II situation, it was much more of, it was just more severe, and then more extreme instances, for example, the takeover of the publishing house and lauding of the Führer's vegetarianism and so forth. The health message was there was a tie-in. Roland Bleich, you want to check that out if anyone wants to find the research on this, B-L-A-I-C-H. You know, you want to develop the master race? Well, follow health reform. So there was a much more, I think there was a much more of a convergence. You could say Conradi and World War I paved the way, but I think it was on a whole nother level in World War II. So I've spent a few minutes flapping my jaws about this, but I have to say I really am not that much of an expert, but these are just some of the things I've picked up.
Well, we find it very helpful. And that's why I've been asking these questions. Now I'm looking at the time, and I don't think we have enough time to hear about the development of the Adventist Peace Fellowship. Is that the right name for the group?
Yes. Okay.
So why don't we take a break now, which is about 11:23, and reconvene at 11:40. Is that okay? And at California time, and then let's hear about the Adventist Peace Fellowship. Maybe at that point we'll turn it over to the group, but maybe I'll ask some questions about exceptions. All right. So how about 11:40? And we're going to ask Doug to disappear so you don't chat with him in our absence. Well, welcome back from the break, everybody. And let's continue our discussion with Dr. Douglas Morgan. Just before the break, I asked him to say a few words, or many words if he wants, about the development of the Adventist Peace Fellowship. When did it begin? By whom was it started? For what reasons did it begin? And so forth.
Well, yes, thank you. Now, one thing I should probably say is that today I think I am going to need to make a cutoff of about, I guess it would be 12:30 in order not to overstay my welcome here. So I just thought for whatever reason, especially if I'm rambling on and you're really ready to move to something else, don't hesitate to cut me off. But anyway, about Adventist Peace Fellowship, it started in 2002. It grew out of discussions between Ron Osborne and myself. I was teaching at what was then Columbia Union College, Tacoma Park, Maryland. He was working for the Center for Law and Public Policy that Roy Branson headed, as well as Roy was also doing some teaching. So this was connected with CUC at the time. And so Ron and I fell into conversation, and the context was the war on global war on terrorism as it was presented. But in particular, the sense of that there was a sort of an overreaction here, and on the part of our government. And I'll say one particular thing in a minute about that. But I was aware of something called the Baptist Peace Fellowship. going back to the 80s. And so that kind of gave me the idea. So the sense that it wasn't pacifism as such, but it was Christians, some Adventists, becoming so closely linked to kind of a hyper patriotism and this all-out war against our enemies, which, interestingly enough, a key thing for me, because I really hadn't followed the history that carefully as it unfolded after the Cold War. But John Jones of La Sierra forwarded me a piece from an editorial piece from the Atlanta Constitution that pointed out that Iraq, North Korea, the what was it called? I can't even remember. Anyway, they were the enemies, but that had already been determined before 9/11. And all of the information that was indicating that Saddam Hussein was behind 9/11 when it wasn't true. And weak justifications for taking military action. Now, again, it's not so much the nuts and bolts of policy as it was that it just seemed like Christians and fellow Adventists were getting swept up in this. So our desire then was to advance, I'm reading from our mission statement here to remind myself, advance understanding of the significance for peacemaking of the beliefs and heritage of the Adventist movement. 2, facilitate cooperative action on current issues. 3, link Adventists with resources, people, and organizations dedicated to peacemaking. We set up a group, an advisory group, and then also incorporated, and it was considerably centered on the campuses, other Adventist campuses, in terms of people who were tied into it, because, you know, that's the world we knew, that's where our friends were. But it essentially was a website which desired to be a hub, again, for information, for connecting people of shared interests. And it did seem to catch on. And I don't think it went, I think it would be an extreme to say it went viral, but it did, for those who did respond to it, they seemed to deeply appreciate it. Probably under my leadership, so to speak, Ron was really the, he wrote out our documents, our vision and statement and covenant. But then he went on, I mean, he served overseas with ADRA and so forth. And so I took the lead, but we really never did, we were never really a full-blown organization, frankly. But I will, if I might just mention, I think the one thing that we did that I'm kind of pleased about thinking about, and that is in 2007, there was a Christian witness against the war in Iraq. So we connected with other denominational peace fellowships or interest groups. And this group met and had a service at the National Cathedral, and then we did a march. Side note of interest, Raphael Warnock, who's now, well, he is a senator from Georgia, running again now to keep the seat he had temporarily won. But he was pastor of Ebenezer Baptist in Atlanta. He was one of the speakers. And Chuck Sandifer, who was director of ADRA, agreed to speak at the National Cathedral. with his title, not officially speaking for the denomination, but as head of Adventist Development and Relief Agency. And so at least we got some representation there and a voice for that witness. So I'll stop there.
Okay, now the website's still active, and
Yes.
And you have conferences now and then?
Yes, although I don't know that we have actually had a full-blown conference. There have been in the pandemic era, there have been some Zoom conferences. I should, I realize now that I stopped in a way that was really very sort of self-oriented. But the fact is, and sometimes I don't know whether it's laziness on my part or whether I want to say that it's a good thing. And that is that after I stepped back, other people have taken it. I have not interfered with it. I've done some things to help out. And so we're now on the fourth set of directors. And so really, I'm not directly involved, but things got at a much better level. Ron Osborne then became director. He set up something called Adventist Peace Churches, where a church can, a local congregation can declare itself to be part of the fellowship and have activities and materials provided for them. Jeff Boyd then became director. He developed podcast, other media things, and currently Lisa Clark Diller of Southern Adventist University and Kara Thompson she's from North Carolina. I think she's in a small business executive in her day job. They are the current leaders, and they're all taking it at a much higher level of activity than it was originally.
Well, great. You gave it birth and it's continuing to grow. That's wonderful. For us, if it's okay, we'll turn over to any questions. I have the whole issue of exceptions that we can introduce if there is a time. If not, we'll postpone it till next week. Are there any questions?
I have one. Anastasia is going to ask a short question, and then I have a question or two I'd like to ask Dr. Morgan, if I may.
Good.
Okay, Anastasia, you go first.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much, Dr. Morgan. Thank you for your scholarship. Thank you for walking the walk, and I'm very grateful to you. Two quick things. I will be very, very quick. Thank you, Dr. Larson, for the verses that you read. And in Greek, what is very encouraging for some of me that is far, far, far from being perfect, is that the Lord ordered in Greek to say este teli, which is the continuous future, becoming.
Oh.
So for one is not static, and for two, he gives us time with his Holy Spirit. And the other word telos, the word telos has several interpretations as logos, which literally one way is the end of it, but the other is the telos of your purpose. Like the purpose of a fruit is to be ripe. The telos of being here on becoming like God, which in Orthodoxy they call it becoming like God. Theosis, yes, one. The other thing, thank you so very much. My question, Dr. Morgan, one of my questions is that apathy, as you have mentioned about killing, do we only kill by bullets, by war? Or the verses also told us by loving and doing all those things is the prevention of war. So isn't apathy or acting or voting for causes, governments or whatever that do harm and kill. And we know, well, we'll go further too much. We don't have much time. I made a passionate statement about South America that Marx was not there. Of course, Marxism was there. Nevertheless, there's some very good books to show and facts to show that in different places, when we are not engaged, but then when we are engaged in the fear of the isms, we have done more harm than good. An excellent book is The Last Colonial Massacre, the Cold War in South America by Greg Grandin and many others. And so isn't it dangerous when we put party above facts and above Jesus' nature? And that way, instead of voting for issues, knowing the issues, etc., even we put church organizations over Jesus and over parties and all these things. Aren't those things, don't we kill by either being apathetic or blind? And I'm very grateful, and I thank you also for people that want to know what has gone recently to the rest of the world, like Greece in the 60s. A must movie, as a documentary like of the 60s, the prelude to the authoritarianism, which is called Z, the letter Z, that means alive. And all this, because when we're aware of what's going around us in our neighbors, isn't it also to love, not the fuzzy love, as Dr. Provanje said, but with actions. And thank you for your kind of activism. Thank you.
Thank you, Anastasia. I would just quickly mention that in relation to part of what you said, that that relates to why this little organization that Ron and I and then others become involved in is peacemaking is the central thing. So it's not rigid ideological about pacifism, which of course is interpreted different ways. I have my convictions on that and views and so forth and historical perspectives, but the central thing is peacemaking, which does then involve hopefully some prevention, as you said.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask, well, I got to ask a question, but I'd like to make a statement. But thank you very much, Dr. Morgan, for this presentation, because this has been a struggle through my whole life. I came of age in the mid-60s, and that was when the Vietnam War was going on. And so I knew people that were killed in Vietnam. I had colleagues that went in service, non-military service. Some went to Canada, and some just a whole spectrum thing. So, but I guess my first point is, do you distinguish between police action and militarism? That's one thing. And then James White, I think it was James White said in the Civil War that it's not on your conscience, but it's on the government's conscience if you kill. Would you mind responding to that? And then finally, I did spend 2 years working in the chaplain's office at Millington Naval Air Station as a civilian. I was a pastor there. And I learned an expression, the meaning of an expression that my father, a World War II veteran, said: your soul may belong to the Lord, but a certain part of your anatomy belongs to the Army. So there's more than just being in the military, just serving on a military action. So could you comment on those which you choose to comment on there?
Okay. Thank you. Pardon me. Thank you. I did hear you, Forrest, but I have to lean in a little because I've neglected to bring headphones, and this device, the volume is not so good. But I think I got what you said. Now, if the other thing would be remembering, but So,
You want to do James White first? Was it James White that made the
Yeah.
statement that if you're,
yeah,
is that an accurate statement?
well, yeah. Now, James White did put out an editorial in the Review in 1862. Now, it's a fluid situation. It's not sort of a clear national draft as we know it today. Starts off with states fulfilling quotas to meet President Lincoln's call, to put down the rebellion. But what James can see that this is going to become more and more of an issue. And so he suggested that, if the government exercises coercion to you, forcing you on pain of incarceration, even death maybe, to enter the military, then the moral responsibility does fall on the military. Now, he did not ever assert that as an official position. And there was a interesting, there was just a flood of reaction against it. What? Elder White? That means if they force us to work on Sabbath, it's the government's fault? We don't have to worry about, you see? And so he said, no, I'm just starting a conversation here. And it was quite a lively series of articles over a couple of years in the Review where various perspectives were given. But the other thing and here's where I have an argument with some of my scholarly colleagues, I think, this was not a just war position on James White's part. Even if that had become a sort of widely accepted by the denomination, it wouldn't be that. No, it would just be that we'll submit to a government coercing us. Now, it so happened, the complicating thing is that actually Adventists were totally against the rebellion and against slavery. So they were in a very complex situation. But this was not somehow like, oh, because this is a good war, then we're kind of morally off the hook. No, it was all about the coercive element of the draft. But even though it did not become officially accepted by any means, and the statements that were agreed upon and what was presented to the government as our position in 1864, was not that. But W.C. White, his son, and others, I think all along thought that that was really the best way to look at it. And so it's a significant influence there. And W.C. wanted to go easy on Conradi, you see, because after all, they're in a situation where you got a very strong-armed government anyway. So that's some thoughts on James White's editorial. Police, differing between police.
Police action and militarism.
Yes, I think there is. Now, making pronouncements about what's right or wrong, well, I guess you have to do it. I mean, because we're trying to be followers of Jesus, and we need to know what to do and what not to do. But to me, there is a lot of area for I mean, room for conscientious disagreement. So that if you're carrying a piece, I'm talking about a gun now, as a member of the military, or even theoretic, well, not, we do have UN international interventions. To me, that is a different story than being part of the military of one nation that is organized to kill and destroy people of another nation, no matter how, I mean, it may be highly justified on many terms, but I think there's a difference. I do think there's a difference there.
Yeah, well, I think I would just add that I see that as not a binary option, but there's a whole lot of gray area and a continuum on that. So, but anyway, okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna just, that third question I just had, there's more to being in the military than just bearing arms. There's a whole bunch of other stuff in there that you got to do or not do that may or be good or not good. So I don't think I would have ever done well in the military. My wife will tell you that. So anyway, just your comment on that.
Well, yes, and I may be a bit tangential, so
Sure.
come back at it again if you like, but I think that this historical shift that I talked about earlier, and we only took it up basically to World War II, but it created a mentality of acceptance and even affirmation of the military among Adventists, so that after the draft ended, talking about the United States now, we have many Adventists joining voluntarily. And you may or may not be able to be a non-combatant. I think it's a lot of factors, but for many who are joining don't really care so much. And if you look at the level of what happens in congregations, and also what gets written up in the union conference, in the union papers, a lot of celebration of military service without really much concern over this historic position about not bearing arms. And so I think that shift that we talked about earlier prepared the way for that, so that now, there are a lot of, like you say, things are usually shades of gray, but the pioneer Adventists, whether it's James White with his idea, or let's see, Roswell F. Cottrell, total 100% pacifist, they would not have dreamed that an Adventist would actually voluntarily join the military. That just would have been beyond the scope of their imagination.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. And by the way, one quick question now, when you go from Brooklyn to Harlem, do you take the subway or do you drive?
Some of both.
Okay.
If my wife and I happen to be both at the church, and in the pandemic era, conditions have become very unusual. So sometimes one or the other, or not both. I take the subway. I hate driving. I can't stand driving in this city. Yeah. But sometimes I do. And more and more lately, I'm just saying, my love, baby, please, you do the driving. I just can't. Anyway.
All right. Well, good. That's good. I'd like to go to Peter now. Peter.
Thank you, Dr. Morgan, for your presentation again.
Yes.
I have a few comments and a question. We are living in a world in which we are surrounded by violence. A world in which might is making right. And if we want to remind that one of the influential people of our time, Karl Marx, recommended, he suggested that the revolutions are the locomotives of history, advocating for violence, for overthrowing through violence the governments. Jesus is making a few recommendations in regard to this that it might help us to clarify a little bit our position. And I'd like to hear your comments about this. First, David read from the Sermon on the Mount, in which, in my view, Jesus abolished the lex talionis and make it clearly that we should not use violence to resist violence through violence. This is a clear statement in my view. Another recommendation which Jesus made is that when you will be persecuted in one city, you have to run to move in another city. Another recommendation that Jesus made in Luke 22, before he was arrested, he was telling his disciples that now is the time when somebody doesn't have a sword, should buy one. And I can add one recommendation made in Jeremiah chapter 48, verse 10. It's a prophecy against Moab, in which it says that cursed is the man that is putting back its sword without blood. If we look at all of this, in light of all of these things, what is your opinion? I mean, it can help us to clarify a little bit our position regarding violence, regarding war. And do you think that the Sermon on the Mount can be applied at the state level? In other words, it's one nation will be attacked, another nation, if it should answer in kind. And you mentioned your position regarding the war in the Gulf, in which Saddam Hussein was accused that he was the organizer of 9/11. Well, he was not, as you clarified, the initiator, but Saddam Hussein did something else. He was trying to wipe out from the map a state that was internationally recognized by the United Nations. And if we look at this in light of Romans, Paul's position in Romans, that God set up borders for every nation on the face of this earth.
Okay. Now, let me try to single out a couple of things. I probably won't be able to speak to all of that, although of course you can follow up. But for me, I guess the question that has to take priority is, what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus Christ? Now there are many just powerful, poignant questions about, well, what happens if we're weak militarily, or this or that, and those have to be weighed. But if the starting point and the central object is what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus Christ, then I think you have to take the Sermon on the Mount quite seriously, and extending love to enemies. And then, that's a very intriguing passage where he says, go out and buy sword. And then they come and say, well, we got 2 swords. And he says, that's enough. Well, now that's a very, what shall I say, cryptic, puzzling, but whatever it means, it doesn't mean we got enough to mount an armed revolution now. I just don't think that there's that text. And then of course, when Peter does whip out a sword, he rebukes him. So anyway, now I do think, and this is probably the most important, at least in my, or at least challenging issue that you bring up. And that is that it does seem to me that the New Testament assumes that there's going to be a difference between the believing community and the world, the government, so to speak, the powers that be. And so the teaching of Paul and others, I think it's in 1 Peter as well, that we respect, we subordinate, it actually doesn't say obey in Romans 13, but subordinate yourself to these powers because they're there, they are there. God uses them to keep violence at bay, and so that they do have this purpose. But it never does it say that you should join in and be part of that. There's always assumption of a difference. Now, later on, we have Christianized government. So, or a whole different situation, and it becomes complicated. But yeah, I don't think that you can run a state, nation state, without benefiting from somebody's military in our world. But remember my starting point and my overall question, not, well, how can we figure out how to take responsibility for a national defense or whatever.
Well, Doug, I think you muted yourself accidentally.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
But the priority then is to be faithful. And then I think that we can show, well, actually, government, people that are faithful to the vision of Jesus end up contributing to society in some pretty important ways, even if they were not willing to kill for the government. But anyway, some thoughts.
Okay.
What do
David?
you think? Can I quickly?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
What do you think, Dr. Morgan, about when Theodosius declared Christianity the official religion of the empire and Christians were serving in the Roman legions?
Well, that was one of the things that actually precipitated Diocletian's persecution. So you do have some remarkable stories of people in the military who declared their allegiance to Jesus, but then others who, after the Constantinian shift, so to speak, you have the Christians in the military, yeah. So yeah, again, I'm not sure that I really answered your question. Are you asking, well, what happened? Okay, they were in the military and now they've become Christian. What should they do?
Yeah. What do you think about the position they adopted? They were serving in the military.
Well, I think they have to grapple with the question of then, what does it mean to be a follower? If I'm going to be a follower of Jesus Christ, what should I do?
What do you think Jesus' statement when he said that give Caesar what is Caesar and God what is God? Can we include in this that was part of giving to Caesar to participate in the national defense?
Well, in my view, that is not a very compelling argument when you have some clear teachings about what Jesus wanted us to do as his follower. You know, so that's my-
Okay, all right. I'm going to. David, would you like to enter in now about the exceptions?
Sure, maybe I can make a comment or two, beginning with a response to Peter. You know, Peter, let me try this idea out on you. And that is, when Jesus says, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's and unto God the things that are God's, he deliberately sidesteps the question. And when they leave, they realize that he has not answered the question, but he has cleverly put the question aside and basically said, you make the decision. And actually, if he says, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's and unto God the things that are God's, we still don't know which is which. And Jesus brings a coin, right? And Jesus says, look whose inscription is on this, or whose, he asks the question, whose inscription is on this? And they say Caesar. And then he says, render unto Caesar, and so forth. Jesus could not possibly have meant that every single coin on which Caesar's imprint could be found belonged to Caesar directly. That shows to me that he was cleverly sidestepping their question. And when they left, they marveled at him, not because he answered their question, but they marveled at him because he did not answer their question. How about that, Peter?
Well, in my view, Jesus was answering a direct question. He was asked about the taxes, if they should pay taxes to the Caesar. And Jesus answered directly to this question, that you should give Caesar the taxes that told to him. My question to Dr. Morgan was if we can add to this answer of Jesus regarding clearly the taxes, some other problems that we owe to the Caesar, like the national defense. It's a discussion. It's
Right.
something that I submitted to you. If
Right.
we can include extend to
Right.
our debt to Caesar, to the government, to the
Sure.
state, some other things in addition to taxes, like the
Right.
national defense.
Right. So I can see some logic to that. Again, we don't know whether that's exactly what Jesus meant, but I can see some logic to it. But to me, it's overshadowed by the teaching example of Jesus, the whole message of the gospel that overcomes evil through nonviolent, suffering, redemptive love. To me, these weigh much more heavily than the kind of reasoning that you mentioned. Now, again, I have to acknowledge we can't work. I mean, it's very difficult to come to some absolute purity of your position. One time I calculated how much of my federal income tax goes to the military. And so I had to say, well, boy, I'm putting in, I'm supporting this. And so that's an issue. Maybe we should, that there have been movements to get people to be able to divert their tax, what they're taxed in different ways. I have not, I've sort of let that go, perhaps being too lackadaisical. So you have a point, and there's some things that we have to work out in terms of implications of the things that we do. But to me, these should not be the central determinants then to say, oh, okay, well, we as Christians need to be full, accepting and participant in the military, and that's more important than following what to me seems to be the clear message of Jesus Christ. Yeah.
Thank you. We can talk a lot about this.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, David, go.
Okay, I don't think we'll introduce the question of exceptions right now because we have so
Yeah.
little time and Doug needs to get away promptly. But I would say to Peter, we do have a big discussion as to what does belong to Caesar and what does belong to God. If we take that as the principle, surely there may be things in addition to taxes that belong to Caesar. And then we would have to talk about what those other things are. So it's a very interesting and fruitful question, I think. It's not at all to the side, but it's very much what we should be thinking about. Now, a couple of things by way of review. I find Doug's distinction between prophetic pacifism and quietistic pacifism very helpful, and not only conceptually as a way of thinking of different options, but also as a way of tracing what happened to us historically. That is, we were always both, but at some point, the priority shifted from being prophetic to being quietistic, and we can ask why. But in any case, that's a very concise way of discussing what happens. Secondly, Doug has emphasized in his own work and in the development of the Adventist Peace Fellowship the idea of peacemaking. And this is one of the places where I have had some frustration because when the people of Russia, not the people of Russia, the military of Russia invaded Ukraine, I went to the website to see what the website would have to say about this. And it didn't have much to say. And my impression has been that when it comes right down to it, in times of conflict, those who are pacifists don't have very much that's very helpful to say. Now, I came to think my way through to this and to say to myself, well, maybe that's not their mission. Maybe they are more like specialists in preventive medicine, but they're not specialists in clinical medicine. So a specialist in preventive medicine might explain to you why you should not smoke, encourage you not to smoke, develop non-smoking plans, and so forth. But if you actually get lung cancer, you're not going to go there. You're going to go to the surgeon or the oncologist or the radiation oncologist. So we don't ask of the preventive medicine doctors to do what these other doctors do. Now, does that make any sense to you? That, okay, we're in the business of prevention, and we realize that we don't have much to say in times of crisis, but we are in the business of prevention, just like people are in the business of preventive medicine. How about it?
I think that is helpful. I think that the invasion of Ukraine has helped me to think more empathically about what it was like during World War II. But that said, I want to underscore, Dave, that what you said is very helpful, I think, in saying, okay, here's our mission, here's what we do, and that's how we make a contribution. But and it's just not my nature or my orientation to think that all Adventists are conscientious, good, faithful, Jesus-loving Adventists. We're going to come up with different views on this. But I would think that even in a situation where it just seems to be such an outright act of aggression and then defensive response, that still our position, or what I would very tentatively suggest, is that All right. Yeah, we do support our nation. Just like we support our nation in the sense that we wanted the war to end in slavery and slavery, not in it, but and so that we will help in hospital, humanitarian, educational ways. But we still draw the line. We're just not going to kill. Now that's, I just find it very difficult to make a big pronouncement, especially to Ukrainian Adventists, about what they're going to do on the ground. But I think we could have a little bit more. I think I would sort of probe a response along those lines to that situation.
Well, one of your themes has been none of us escapes supporting the military unless we just kill ourselves. And maybe even that's helpful because the nation has one less person to feed. So there's just no way to wholly exempt ourselves from participation. So we all compromise and draw a line somewhere. And where we draw the line may differ and does differ. But still, even those who draw the line very, very tightly are still participating. Even if they go on a hunger strike, they're still participating. So it's just not possible to wholly escape this. Now, thank you, Dr. Morgan, and we will see you next week for one last session. And we are concluding right on time, so you can shut down and escape the people. I shouldn't say escape. Give back your property to the people who own it.
Well, thank you very much. And again, great to be with you. And I will endeavor to do all I can to be a little bit more available for extra time next week. So anyway, thanks very much.
Okay, here's the benediction. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.